There we go. Okay. Hey, everybody. We are live. This is Thibert, and I have been working in the comics industry for over 30 years for companies Marvel, DC, working on titles like Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate X-Men, X-Men Uncanny, Adventures of Superman, Action Comics. My current book is Super Sons, and I think we still have an issue of that that's left to come out. I think this month. I think this month that issue comes out. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce Taylor,
Hi, everybody. It's me. I'll be reading your chat today.
the lovely and talented Taylor. She's also my co-writer on Black and White, and she's been working out of Hack Shack Studios for the last 5 years.
About, I think.
Yeah, so we primarily ink at the studio, but Taylor and I also write a lot of, create our own things together. So, and we have a special guest to hang out with us at the chat,
Hmm.
and his name is John. You might know him as Christ Energetics, and he's a very, very talented musician. And he came to us when he heard that Black and White was going to be an Indiegogo, and we were going to try to fund the book. So, hey, John, say hi to everybody.
How's everybody doing?
Yeah, you wanna give a little backstory? I was gonna do it for you,
Sure.
but I think it'd be better if you did it.
Well, my backstory is for the whole Comics Cake crew, or for getting back into comics. Just only recently, I guess, before, right around when Ethan started to, his channel started to get big. I kind of stumbled onto his channel somehow, and that was right before he got Mike Miller involved. And I just sort of saw the whole thing coming together. So, just from an outsider's point of view, like I was a pretty big comics fan in the late '80s and through the mid '90s. So I pretty much got sucked into that pretty quick, and I started following what was going on. And I've been a musician for most of my adult life. I've also been into comics for that period of time too, on and off. And so for it was me, it was just I just saw what Mike was doing, and I noticed that Mike needed a lot of help with promotion. So I offered to do a song because he kept on saying, "Wouldn't it be cool to do this like an '80s styles theme song, like Thundercats or Transformers or what have you? Just something cool, you know."
That thing was awesome, by the way.
Yes.
That was so cool. If anybody hasn't seen it, where can they find it, John?
You can go to my YouTube channel. Just I'll put uh, let's see. I'll just say hello in the chat here, and you can just go ahead and go to my channel, and that's where you can find me. So it's at Christ Energetics. If you type in Christ Energetics YouTube, you should find me. I'm not sure what the original actual name of the channel is right now because I've changed
Okay.
my handle too many times. I can't remember.
Well, you
But
can send it to us later. We can add that to the links here.
Yeah, we'll add the link to
right,
the description if you send it over.
Yeah.
and I
Um,
have.
oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. I was gonna say, for the most part, I haven't been promoting myself very heavily. I just kind of reached out to Mike, and by proxy, we found each other because you kind of stepped in to help Mike during that time too, and you started to get pulled into, you're promoting your stuff, and it just all kind of happened naturally, I guess.
Yeah, it was awesome when you. I don't know how it happened. You said something about music, or maybe I said, "Hey, how about doing some music?" And then the next thing I know, we're talking about Bond themes and surf guitar, and the next thing I know, you're like, I got an idea, and so you put a couple tracks down, um, and sent them our way, and they were absolutely amazing. So. Um, God, how early? This was just a couple weeks ago now, right? This thing came together quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Taylor edited into the Indiegogo black and white video, and so when you guys listen to that, we're gonna post that after this as well. We'll post the video that we're making reference to, that it has like all the soundtrack stuff in the background is all John's doing. And it was just, we just brainstormed one day, and John, you like surf guitar, right? You were like, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what my weird, how everyone, not everyone's like this, but a certain musician, some people are really into classical. They play like more. Some people are super well-rounded musicians. They can do a little bit of everything. For me, I think I've always been a little bit more mainline American rock and roll music. In terms of, well, I like British, I like different stuff too, but that stuff just comes out of me kind of naturally. So when like I pick up a guitar, electric guitar, like I always started playing kind of surf music, just like I heard it and then I would just reinterpret it and it would just come pouring out of me. So that's
That's
sort
your
of,
default. That's pretty
yeah,
cool.
pretty much. Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
It's pretty neat how sometimes like creatively things fall into line, and you don't really have to work at it. Like you just find somebody, you meet somebody, and you're just like, oh man, this is not going to require a lot of heavy lifting or work. And so when you came in, it was just like you nailed it. And then when you put those drums in, the more heavy drums in the places, I was like, oh, because I'm a drummer. I like to play drums. And so when you put those drums in, I was like, yeah, now we got something. We got the surf and we got the heavy drums in there. So it's like kind of like Wipeout, you had that kind of like that kind of stuff in
Yeah,
there. And then you had like that kind of like
yeah.
surf guitar over it. And it just fit. And I'm just so flattered that you did it, and also that my little comic book now has a musical theme. I mean, how cool is that? I mean,
Well,
how many people can say that they have a musical theme to go with their comic book?
Well, there's two also, because what was really cool was John, you made like a couple tracks, but we played the test video and I had some like stock techno music. And then you emailed me like right after and you're like, "Oh, I kind of liked the techno music in the second half. So here's like my version of some like kind of dark techno music." So he ended up using both, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and I haven't. I mean, I thanked you, but I'm going to thank you publicly too. So thank you so much for doing that. You went so far above and beyond, and that's the neat thing about this community is that we're all kind of there together for each other, and we're also building this. So it really feels like we're building something significant. We're building something cool for people to come and hang out. And it's not just comics. It goes beyond that. So it's neat how music can affect comics and comics can affect music. And like I said early on, I always drew as a kid, but about the age of 13, I just started really liking music. And so I bought a cheap pawn shop drum set and just started playing. And I've never stopped. So I'm 50 some odd years old now, and I still have my drums in my drum room, and I still play all the time. So I was actually thinking I was going to be a professional musician like you, John. Like maybe I was going to do that someday, you know.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I've been there too, and I had to walk that back. I'm not a fit like as a terms of professionalism. I do try to carry myself as a professional, and I do consider myself in that talent pool. But I really kind of cut the cord short a couple of times because I was an artist too. I did visual arts for 10 or 15 years. I was involved in theater. I was involved in a whole bunch of different, like my arts scope is pretty wide.
oh
So
my gosh, our backstories are almost identical. I actually studied theater arts in college as well.
yeah, I got kind of roped into on the side of that a little bit, but a lot of my technical skills just I just have one of those things where I can translate stuff technically. I just work really well with other people interpreting ideas, and I was always good at that. So even though I didn't really study theater per se, I did work in the theater, and
Yeah.
I just got involved. But just as fast as I was involved, I got out of it too, because the culture wasn't exactly. I wasn't all about the culture necessarily.
Yeah, that's kind of why I got out of rock and roll too, because I was playing the clubs in Hollywood. It was the late '70s, early '80s, so there was like the hair metal and stuff like that. So, like Whiskey and Madame Wong's and the Troubadour in Hollywood,
Yeah.
we would play, and it's not that those people are like it just wasn't my thing. I wasn't a big partier. I think if I could have met people like Geddy Lee and Neil Peart, like those Rush guys early on, because those guys are like geeky musicians, and I think I was more of a geeky musician. I like the technical side of it. I liked, being in the studio. I liked the creative aspect of writing and things, but I wasn't a big like partier or going out and like screaming and basically the sex, drugs, rock and roll part of it. I like the rock and roll part, but the other two, they were okay. And so I just think the lifestyle was just not real suited for me personally. I don't judge it. I mean, to each his own. But for me, I think it wasn't that cool. So that's why I got out. But like if I would have met people like you, John, and like I said, like those Rush guys, because those guys are like nerds. Whenever you hear their story, it's like
Yeah.
they don't go after the show. They don't go party, and womanize. They just go back to their hotel room and read a book or or write a song or something.
Right. And they walked away from the industry with a whole lot of respect that a lot of actually other acts never managed to do. Even stars, people that were considered stars in their day, sort of have been forgotten. They walk away, but Rush is there's a diehard fan base like that. Not everyone, it's not everyone's cup of tea, but in terms of the way they handled themselves, was to be commended because they really went far and above what was to be expected of people in that situation. And
Yeah,
that's
they had a lot of integrity.
Yeah, I walked away from a music career at a young age, and I would say I walked away. I was kind of forced out of it because I just was the circumstances were wrong. I was in I was a Seattle transplant at the time, and this is well after the Seattle scene had come and gone. But
Okay.
I was still there was the remnants of that scene still clung pretty tightly, and I come from a different scene where near DC. So in DC has the same kind of thing going on where the remnants of the DC vanguard in terms of the music scene it was really strong, and so you can't really escape those networks. And what happens is you either get tired of it or you integrate and you lose whatever individuality you have, and you have to just fit in somehow. And I just felt like I never fit in. And I think the guys I was working with, the people I was working with at the time, we didn't feel like we felt fit in, and we didn't go the professional route. So we just kind of hung it up in our in our mid 20s like a lot of people do.
That's God. This is parallel lines. This sounds like my story as well. Yeah, because that's about the time where I kind of walked away from it as well and started, doing more of my art and going back to school and studying, and getting into comics and all
Yeah.
that.
Well, the funny thing, Art, is that I was a pretty diehard comic fan from about the 6th or 7th grade. I mean, I was prior to that in the 80s when, the Super Friends and Spider Man and his amazing friends and Hulk
Oh
era and
yeah.
all that era. I mean, that was like I think Mitch Brightweiser and I are pretty much the same age. So, like, we grew up with that exact template. So we were steeped in I have some classic X-Men back issues right in front of me here. So we're steeped in that era where everything was coming out of this, uh, Arthur Adams and, just all the different creators of that time. So we're kind of steeped in that. And what happened to me was that when Image came out, I was right there because it was like that was I was like 14, 13, 14 years old when that
The
came out.
perfect age.
The
Yeah. So
right, like the
I
exact demographic.
Yeah, and I remember Art your name all over stuff. So like it's pretty remarkable. That's weird that I'm sitting here talking to you, but it's so funny because it was such a huge part of my development as an artist. And I was drawing comics when I was 14, and I was pretty good. I never got into sequential I never really stepped into the world of doing the sequential art though. I was right on the cusp of it, but then I went into more fine art stuff at that point.
So what were you like painting and stuff like that? Like fine
Yeah,
art?
I think really what I was interested in was figure drawing. So comics really appealed to me. So I was just drawing all the time, and I was I did first it was Batman after the '89 Batman came out, and just after that, McFarlane Spider Man,
Oh,
and
so when you meant fine art, you meant comic books, not like like.
well, comic books was the gateway to me doing fine art.
Oh, okay, okay.
So so the adult version of that, in of course in the most clean sounding way, the the mature way of dealing with things was to say, oh, well, I like drawing these figures, so I guess I'll be a fine artist. So what turns out, I was a pretty good painter. So
Cool.
I just ended up being doing painting and sculpting, and I mean, I've done a bunch of different things like that, but I really put comics aside when I got involved with music because music was a more immediate reward for me, and I
Did
didn't
you play
have.
a lot on stage? Did you get put your music out there?
Yeah, I had a band called a Cricket in Times Square, and that was the culmination of about 3 or 4 years of bands in my teenage years. So right at the end of college, me and my college friends where we had a band. So 21, 22, that's when it all culminated. And then that band lasted for a few years. And we put out some material. We had a label, and we got into Rolling Stone and all that
Oh,
stuff.
nice.
Yeah, which was pretty unusual. Now it's obviously looked down upon. I mean, even people are say, "Oh, Rolling Stone." Yeah, I'm like, well, it's not like we asked to be in Rolling Stone. It was probably someone like got wind of it, and our label, the guy who was running the label was a friend, and he just knew the right people, so he just
Wait,
pushed it
wait,
into
wait.
someone's
Who
hands.
would say something bad about you
I
because you end
know.
Well,
up in
let me
Rolling
tell you,
Stone?
this is
That's a lot of cred, man.
this is where I like this is where my Comets Gate experience as a fan, but also an insider, comes into play.
Okay.
I understand how the artistic indie world and the commercial world meet and interact and how people behave. So let me tell you, when people in the indie world try to put something out, there's like a cool factor attached to it by being obscure. So if you're being obscure and you don't want to be labeled, there's a value attached to that label, and particularly if you're under the age of 30. Not always, as you can see by how people behave online, but
Hmm.
there's a tendency for people under the age of, say, 30 years old, or 20 in their 20s, or coming out of their teenage years, to attach obscurity, coolness, independent, and they're trying to make everything punk rock in their own way, so they have to identify. They attach a weight and a value to that identification. And then if someone tries to disrupt it or mess with it, then they lash out at them. And the most popular way of lashing out is saying you're uncool because you're old and you have A, B. They'll list off of, dozens of reasons why you're not cool or why something isn't good. So,
Yeah, it's like they say, well, you sold out, you went commercial or whatever. You
Mainstream.
went mainstream, yeah.
right. So the mainstreaming of art in music, there's a parallel there. It didn't, it didn't turn up the same way, because this happened way back in like the '80s, pretty much for music. So Art, you were kind of there. You kind of missed that in the music world a little bit, because you diverted and went over to something that was more business oriented, in terms of the business value of it had a lot of weight because there was more commercial clout. It had more of that rock and roll vibe where people were still like buying comics, and music was more jaded at that point. And that's when you had quote unquote college rock. I mean, you remember when they called it college rock?
Yeah,
No one
yeah.
calls it college rock because it was called college rock for a reason. It was because they were young kids coming from the university, getting together and making interesting, like somewhat interesting artistic music, and that was informing the rock culture for a while, and that was deemed important for a while. But that got washed away pretty quickly.
Why do you think that? Do you think it was from the fan base, or do you think it was from the like Warner Brothers and the different music publishers that were trying to demean the fact that you guys were creating a new venue to market and get your music out there?
It definitely has a lot to do with the business side of things because they want to stretch these things out instead of capitalizing on the moment and getting people to crank stuff out like in the 60s. If you compare the 60s music and you compare that to say like the late 80s and 90s, there's like a different, like in the 60s it was the short game and everyone was just cranking it out, and then you had this glut of great material. But what happened later on after, you know indie music came out and all this other stuff came out, punk rock was commercialized, and then they started playing the long game with it and saying, hey, we can make money off of this. And then turned into this thing where everything got stretched out for like 5 or 10 years. The same kind of music just kept on getting pushed. And then it was just became a corporate publishing venture. And there's different arms of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. However, it didn't have that free flowing kind of energy that maybe comics would, because comics was all based on month to month, this month to month or quarterly. So you could see the results of where you were going. So that's why there was so much, the energy is different.
Well, in the day too, like a lot of bands like the Beatles, they would put 2 and 3 albums out a year.
It's
My
crazy to think about
Yep.
now.
my gosh, like that's crazy. Like you take a contemporary band and they may put an album out every 2 years. So yeah, there was quite a bit of productivity in a time, and then yeah, you're right. I think then it becomes mandated, and then it becomes formulated to fit whatever the corporate formula is. So it's like,
Yeah.
well, this is what we're saying is going to be hot now, and so that's what we're going to push. Versus like maybe, I don't know, in the 50s, 60s, I wasn't around making music then, but maybe it was more of just like, we're open to this, let's just put stuff out there and see what sticks. And also those guys were creating rock and roll at the time, so there wasn't even like, what's the definition,
Right.
all those sub headings didn't exist back then. So
Yeah, all the different genres were kind of being made at that time.
yeah, exactly.
I think what we're seeing now with Comicsgate is a good way of deciphering all of this, because what we're dealing with is people who are inherently creative can produce a fair amount of good material in reasonable amounts of time to keep people interested. Uh, there, there's a value attached to it that crosses over the boundaries of cool versus corporate. Um, all these things are set up in a way that makes the comics more attractive now than they would have been 10 years ago, because everyone was still enamored with a corporate model, just simply because of the how much money is invested in all those IPs. Like I said before, I don't have a problem with people making money off this stuff. If they want to make money off Spider-Man all day long, that's fine. But here's the deal. I grew up with Spider-Man, so I know the golden years of Spider-Man, and you can't take that away from somebody. And it's no different with rock and roll music or just music in general. You can't take away the quality from something just because people say, "Oh, it needs to change." You can't
Yeah,
take away the quality. It's impossible. It's almost impossible to do.
because just by existing and being what it is, it becomes undeniable. Like you can't deny it. Like you listen to a Beatles song, and I don't know. I would deny. I don't think there's anybody that would not be able to find at least one Beatles song that moves them, that they think is cool. So I know it's easy to say the Beatles, but I think there's a lot of other bands that have the same qualities that would just become undeniable to the majority of the people. And once you get to that point, then, like you said, time can never take that away from you.
Absolutely. That's the way I feel about it. And then I've kind of come full circle because I feel when I was making this music, when I was making the Lone Star theme song for Mike, and then when I pretty much gave myself a little bit of respite because I was in the process of buying house and stuff, to work on the black and white theme music, I just kind of was connecting to all this stuff. I was having dreams about the house that I grew up in, where I started collecting comics. I was having some intense my son's actually going into that age range now, so he's like coming at it. He's early teen. He's growing up. I'm providing him with as many good classic comics as I can get my hands on. So we buy a lot of back issues, and we try and buy as much collected material as we can from different eras, so he knows what good comics are.
See,
Because
that's the value of back issues that people
yeah.
overlook now.
Oh yeah, we scour the dollar bins at every comic book store we can get our hands on, because we're like, okay, if we have a collection now, we didn't have that collection 6 months ago, and that's partially thanks to you guys, thanks to Ethan and uh, Mike Miller um, and you, Art, and just having that renewed interest and saying, hey, let's get ourselves back to fundamentals and to what makes a good story and what makes good art. What makes us kind of put all these pieces together and say these are the comics that inspired, like, 10 years of Marvel movies or what have you.
Yeah, for me, I just want to have fun again, and uh, at first, the YouTube, I'm not a real. I can be outgoing, but I'm pretty much used to just working in my studio and being alone. So this is a whole new experience for me, like talking with people and talking, publicly like this. But I'm starting to embrace it. I'm starting to really like it because I'm seeing the validity of it and the uniqueness of it, and we can get feedback directly. As we're progressing, we can put up work in progress stuff. We can keep people updated on what we're doing. We can build excitement. We can interact. It's a pretty amazing time. I've been doing this for 30 years, like I said at the beginning, and this is a really really unique time. And I think a lot of people use the internet for like a lot of snarkiness and anger and things, but I'm going to use this technology in a good way, in a positive way, and just try to promote comics and people like yourself, and get the message out there that this entertainment can be fun. We can have fun. We can create comic books. I mean, I used to have some editors that would get very intense and get very serious with me, and I'd go, "Why are you doing this?" And then they go, "Why are you talking to me like this?" And I, listen, if comic books aren't fun, then why the heck are we doing this? I could do other things that pay me a lot more money than comic books, but I do this because I love it and it's fun. So, if we can't have fun doing this, then why in the heck are we doing this? Because nobody's getting rich. Um, and so I just like that aspect of comics because it's a childlike medium. And, we're older, but we still love it. And I just think if we can bring that energy back and that fun, like in the 90s, you said when Image came, those guys weren't doom and gloom. They weren't talking about like, cynical aspects of the industry and stuff. They were just having a ball. They were bringing it to the people. In those days, you had to do shows and stuff like that, but now we have the internet, so we're bringing it to the people like they did in the past. Um, via the internet. And I just think it's an amazing time, and I'm so glad that I'm still here and that I'm able to do this. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of us out here that are really glad that's happening too. Honestly, there's a lot going on from my point of view, that we need to take the lessons from, that, Stan and Jim Shooter and whoever was doing stuff in the 80s. People, creative people who put the passion into the work, and then you had great cartoons coming out. I mean, you look back on the cartoons, yeah, there's some nostalgia there, but they were the platform for getting the IPs out to kids, where, I grew up on that stuff. I have no complaints. So for me, and then into the 90s, the same thing. They did a really good job rebooting that stuff in the 90s as well. I mean, if anyone watched the X-Men or Spider-Man cartoon in the 90s, they were getting good stuff. it might have not been perfect, but that was a vehicle to get that energy pumped out there. Plus, you had the music, and it gave people an inkling of what it might be to see something on a big screen.
Rhaegar Targaryen in the chat says, actually, as a kid, I remember getting very interested in comics from Marvel because the stories seemed very mature in content.
Yeah, but they were always fun though. They didn't get overly gratuitous and they weren't overly angsty. So they did deal with mature subject matter, but they were still delivered in a way that it paid off in a good action adventure fun way, I think.
And I think it depends on how young you were when you were reading them, because you know, if you were like 9 and you're reading up, they may seem more mature than if you were reading them as like a teenager.
Yeah.
Because there are
Yeah.
things that like I've reread that as a kid, like I read like comics I read as a kid, and I'd be like, wow, that was so serious and like deep. And then I read them when I was in high school, and I was like, this is kind of stupid. like,
Yeah. Yeah.
like they're still good, but it's like it kind of depends on how young I think you were when you started.
But that's the fun aspect of it. Like you can look back now and you go, it really wasn't that serious. Like in the '60s, this is how old I am. There was the Batman TV series with Adam West, and so when I was a kid, I thought that stuff was serious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was a farce. That stuff is so hilarious. Like you watch that stuff as an adult, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And it was on twice a week, and I was a psycho Batman fan as a kid, and I'm sure my parents were just rolling their eyes like, what's wrong with my son? He thinks this stuff is so amazing.
I like
Yeah.
cried when Dinobot died on Beast Wars as a
Oh yeah.
child.
Oh man.
So that like devastated me. And I rewatch it now and I'm like, this is really good for a kid show. But like, if I was an adult and I like walked in on my daughter crying about this, I'd be like, okay.
That's it. You're never gonna watch Beast Wars again.
Yeah, like the Transformers movie, I remember that. That was like a benchmark thing. Like I remember watching it on video, like on VHS with my neighbor, and my neighbor was a little bit younger than me, and we were still young. I must have been like 9, and he was maybe like 6 or 7. And I remember we got real serious, like when it was going down, and the Transformers were getting, their spear, getting speared and all this stuff.
The stakes get real high in that movie towards the end.
Yeah, and you're like, oh my god, like they're like the emotion for a preteen kid watching that Transformers animated movie. Oh man, it was just, I mean, the music, they had the power rock 80s music in
I
there.
was
It
just
was
gonna ask.
You got the touch.
Yeah,
yeah.
who did that? It was like White Lion or something. It was an actual
Yeah.
band, right? That like
Yeah,
an
I think it was White
established band.
Lion, maybe. Yeah. Is that right?
Transformers.
Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, you got to hand it to the Japanese, man. They definitely clued into. You can really thank the Japanese. We'll have to tell Mike. See, that's where I really like laughed a lot when Mike wanted to put out a song, because I kept on thinking, I was like, this has something to do with the Mike being having Japanese, family, because like growing up in, like I was really affected by like that kind of rock music, and I'm wondering if it was just because the Japanese put it in all their cartoons
They
of that
did.
time.
Yeah.
It's like ah! And you're like, what? There's like, oh, like Art. I'm a big fan actually of a band of your era, like the Striper guys. Actually,
Oh yeah.
I was a huge fan of those guys when I was like 11. Like my sister brought home the tape when I had older sisters, so when I was like 11 or 12, like I was listening to that stuff when I was like 10, and I
That's
was like,
cool.
I lucked out though, because although Striper get a lot of flack for being like, oh, they're silly, actually me is, you know what I mean? So like I felt like I lucked out a little bit. Like I was like, okay, I can look back and say, hey, these guys were really talented. Like they were part of this group of, like, you look at it because of VH1, VH1 put all the behind the music and stuff all those years. And so it's like, oh, hair metal. And then you go back and listen to it, you'll be like, okay, hey, look, it's legit music. it was a goofy thing during its time, maybe, but hey, it influenced everyone in a way because it was in like every animated series up until like
Hey, hey,
1993.
hey, John, did you the striper thing? Did you like? Because they had stripes on all their clothes and everything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like the Van Halen. They took the Van Halen thing to its utmost limit, I think.
yeah. Hey, have you? Since we're talking about like Christian rock, did you ever hear about or hear of the band Guardian?
Yeah, I know of Guardian. Yeah, I know. I mean, I kind of run out slightly outside of these circles, so I kind of know about it. Yeah, I do
Well,
know about it.
the guy Tony Palacios, the guitar player for Guardian, was my neighbor when
Oh,
I lived in Huntington Beach. He
yeah.
had the apartment right next to me, so we would go to all. He would invite me to all the Guardian shows, and they have a couple albums out. I mean, they're legit.
Yeah, they're really
They're
good, actually, I think.
published and everything, and so they had what was it like? Oh my gosh. Saints Battalion, Saints Battalion, and there's a bum, 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 you know, I just go into it, and they used to open for Striper all the time. So gosh, what was that? Was probably their mid
Oh,
'80s,
thank
like
you.
early mid '80s or whenever that was, and so I went to all those shows
Thank
when
you.
we were in Southern California.
Oh,
So I
that's
got
really
to see,
that's
yeah, I
funny.
got to see all those guys, and those guys were like, they were also playing at like churches and stuff.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so it was so weird to like you know, you see all these rock guys because I mean they were all Christian, but they were all still dressed like that. You know what I mean? They had the leather and they had the hair all teased and everything, and they're all walking into whatever the auditorium at the church is, and
Yeah.
they're all
It,
rocking out
it
to
is
God.
funny. I've dissected all that history. Like I'm a bit of a music history buff too. And what I've because I think that's just part of being a studio nerd or people, when you learn a lot about stuff, you just get sucked into it. And it's not that different from comics and music. I'm always going to bring this together because they're both a big part of my life.
Same.
When I sat down, when I sit down and I'm thinking about how people came up and like thinking about like maybe Kirby and Ditko and Simonson and all these people and just all the different greats that have come along. And then I think of it in music terms. It's pretty interesting how all this stuff came about because it's not like these people were sitting down. They're like, oh, I'm going to take my Amish clothing off, or and I'm going to put on this leather jacket, and I will be like preaching to the world. And it's almost like it came about much more naturally. And I think people just forget about just living in the moment a little bit and just kind of just doing it. And I
Yeah,
think that's
stop
what a lot of
stop
these people are
forcing
doing.
things. Stop forcing things into some kind of mandate, some kind of corporate mandate. Just kind of let creativity be creativity and be open to it. I agree.
Yep, that's pretty much how I feel about it. And I think that's the how I've become more productive. I mean, I just turned 40, so I'm entering into that phase of my life where I really know what it means to actually produce something. I think up until now I was probably trying my hardest to do something really well. Actually, I have projects that will probably never get heard because of interpersonal problems. Unfortunately, that's just the way it goes. Especially with music, your collaborative efforts can get thrown out pretty easily from dealing with other people. So maybe one day something will get released. But there was one point like 5 or 10 years ago, maybe, where I was producing an album, and this was after my old band had died, and one of our friends that was in another great band, and him and I got together and we produced this stuff, but we never really got it out, and it was just probably some of the best music I've ever heard, and not because I liked it because it was mine. It just had that energy to it where you were just like, okay, wow, this is good. But we never could really put the finishing touches on it, and then we kind of drifted apart.
Sometimes things are lightning in a bottle. You know, sometimes
Yeah.
you just catch a moment in your career and your creative arc, and yeah, you got to get that out there, John. You got to somehow you got to finish that up and get that out there.
Well, I do have a lot of that stuff on the back burner, and I think I'll be able to work something out at some point and get stuff out. I do have a lot of material. Sometimes, it's like with comic art is a little bit more. I guess there's a when you produce something and put something out, there's an audience waiting for you to put out your next drawing, or you can have a commission. With music, it's a little different. It's a lot different because, well, first of all, people will want to see, they want performance at their fingertips. So I'm sure you're experiencing this now with doing the streams and, talking and just conversing and putting you're putting your efforts out on display. And Taylor, you're feeling the pressure. I'm sure you're feeling the technical pressure and stuff too, because I know I feel it. You want to just make sure everything comes out right.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird. I'm kind of like tech oriented and I still feel like there's a lot more I can learn. So
Yeah.
like kind of, I don't know, I think everybody who deals with technology is kind of learning a lot of stuff on the fly and trying to improve as they go.
Her superpower, John, is that anything that we need to do. I mean, she's also a very talented writer and artist, but the technical side of it,
Oh, thank
it,
you.
it doesn't. Oh, you're welcome. Whatever it is that's thrown, that somehow on the fly she's able to work through it and make it all happen. And I mean, none of this would even exist if it wasn't for that, part of, what she can bring to the table. And so yeah, I mean, even like this show right now, we wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for her, because God only knows. There's no way I would have been able to do it technically,
Yeah,
technically speaking.
I picked up on that. Definitely, Taylor, you definitely are doing like a lot. You're doing a lot of work to make this happen. But here's the thing: Art is a really talented. Art, I'm not blowing smoke here. I'm just,
No,
I'm
feel
trying to
free,
do.
John. Feel free. I
You
don't
know
mind.
how you know how Doug has been saying all this stuff. Doug Tenaple has been saying this stuff. Don't be a fan, don't fanboy out. Just be a peer. And from a peer's point of view, you have the catalog to back up what you're bringing to the table. So there's no question in my mind you're going to
Definitely.
deliver a great product. So you need people that in your sphere that are going to participate in, are their good qualities are going to come out.
Well,
Well,
also, I think for me, if I'm not interested in something, then I I don't even get into it because I have so little bit of time every day. So some people have time, and it's their hobby to be technically oriented. Like they like video games, or they like the internet, or they like to figure out how computers work and all those things. I'm just not that guy. I like to draw. I like to write. I like to play music, and those are the things I become good at. I just don't. I don't have a lot of hobbies, and so computers and things just they don't really interest me. And just based on my personality, if I'm not interested in something or I don't have a reason to do it, I just don't do it. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So I'm
I can.
glad there are people in my life that actually are interested in those things. And that's, I always think this too. I tell my daughter this. It's like, why are there so many different people and so many different opinions and so many different things? It says, because we're individual in life, but we're also a collective. And so what I can't do, you can do, John. And
Right.
what John can't do, Taylor can do, and so on and so on and so on. So we find each other, and then we kind of network, and we connect, and then we create something hopefully good and positive out of that. And so that's why also, just to get a little bit more into like what's happening with Mike and stuff like that, is that it's a shame when I'll tell the backstory, but it's a shame when people can't create, or that a group of people try to stop somebody from being able to do what they want to do, which is create. And so, if
Right.
you guys haven't heard a little bit of backstory, Micus Miller had a contract with Grand Rapids Comic Con to have an appearance, and he was going to go there. And I'm sure he built it up with his fans and everything, and advertised it and stuff. And he had a contract with them, and then there was an appearance fee involved as well. And so, was it a cosplayer, Taylor?
I don't know a lot about her because I actually didn't hear her name until this whole like scandal came to be. But I heard that she's like, I guess she's a cosplayer who has like an internet presence.
That's
Yeah.
true. That's
Yes.
that's. I
Oh,
think
go
that's.
ahead.
I think most people. I've been following it pretty closely, but I was mentioning to you guys before we started that this kind of situation, I've seen it go down before in real life. Not that this isn't real life, but it was a little closer to home because it was a friend of mine, or someone who I was becoming close friends with at the time, and it was like an ex of his, and it just went. It was a horrible situation, and I would wish it on no one. And I was basically trying to talk him through how to deal with this person because there was like some serious harassment happening, um, in his personal, and it extended to every aspect of his life. So I seeing this SJW phenomenon, whatever it is, it's these people who are poorly integrated with their whole personality, or some aspect of their life is unfulfilled, and they just are on this rampage to try and destroy creative people and people who are, creative and maybe are opinionated. I don't know. I mean, Mike's pretty opinionated with his how he puts himself out there, but I don't think any reasonable person would misconstrue that as being like a completely ridiculous, hateful person.
Right.
Definitely.
I don't see that.
Yeah, I think if you listen to Mike long enough, you realize that he's got a big heart. He's a good man, and he's created numerous opportunities for me over the years. One was he had a publishing company, and that it's not that Image didn't want to publish the second volume of Chrono Mechanics. It's that they were kind of like, we couldn't guarantee the sales, so they were kind of like advising me that maybe we shouldn't publish it. So I remember just talking to Mike one day, and he goes, bring it over to Alias. We'll publish it." And I was like, "Really?" He goes, "It's done, right?" I said, "Yeah, I spent months on this thing finishing it up." He said, "Just bring it over, we'll publish it." And you know what? To his word, he didn't only publish that, but he published the first graphic novel as well, and they did it all in color. And and I'll never forget that. I'll always be indebted, because you know as well as I do, John, like sometimes we work in a vacuum and we build these things and we spend months and months and sometimes even years working on a project, and sometimes it'll just die, like that project you were just saying earlier. It
Mhm.
just sits on the shelves, and that's, for a creative person, that's the worst, if you can't get it out in front of people, because what's the point at that? It's just going to collect dust on your shelf, and no one will ever see it. So um, it's I'm in a lot of debt to Mike, and I think that, like you said, Mike is he's opinionated, but if you listen to him long enough and you're fair-minded, you'll realize that he has strong views on things, but that's all. And we need to get into a place. I think this is kind of my place in all this, because I got into this group and hanging out with Ethan and Mitch and Mike and all the other guys, not because I was crucified or that people came at me. It was just that I felt like I couldn't be myself around my peer group, and I couldn't say what I wanted to say, and that, I don't know, not unlike a superhero, I felt like I needed to be with these guys. I needed to side with these guys, if nothing more, to just kind of push back a little bit, to get it to a place of being normal again, where we weren't living into this extreme right and left, ideological place anymore, where we could kind of just, we could view or voice our opinions, and then at least have enough respect for each other as human beings to just go, okay, that's your opinion, and then just move on, say I disagree with it, but it's okay, because I I say this all the time. I'm in a relationship long term with my wife over 25 years, and we don't agree on everything. As a matter of fact, we probably disagree, quite a bit. But there's a mutual respect, and we're both moving in the same direction. So we're smart enough to know that we love each other. We're both human beings. We're going to have differences of opinions, and we're going to have problems. But in the end, we respect each other, and we're both human beings. So it's just a difference of opinion. That's it. And sometimes the difference of opinions, if you're fair-minded, you can talk about those things and you can connect. You can figure out the best way to approach the problem based on the two different opinions versus just one opinion. And once again, the collective of us as human beings, we all bring something different to the table as a collective, experience. And I do believe that difference of opinion is good. It's probably one of the best things that we have to offer. I think it only gets bad when people take it to the extreme and then want to destroy another person based on opinion, and then they finger point and they name call and they put people in these categories. Mike is not a bigot. Mike is not any of those things. He's not a Nazi. I mean, he's far from all these things. He's just a guy with a different point of view. That's it. He's just a guy with a different point of view. And whoever takes offense to that is just not a grown up. It's like he has an opinion. He might be a little bit brash about the opinion. But in the end of the day, it's just his opinion. Why do you have to go to the extreme of trying to destroy his character or to take money out of his mouth?
Right.
Like take, because let's face it, John, I don't know if you're the sole, breadwinner, but in this family, I am, and Mike's the same. So and that's why I wanted to talk about this as well. When you do these things, you take income out of, somebody's, I don't know, food out of somebody's mouth.
Right.
You take these things away from somebody. Well, now that's money that Mike doesn't have. And what is Mike going to do with that money? Is Mike going to be selfish about it and go buy a bunch of stuff for Mike? He's going to go buy a bunch of new clothes and shoes and a new car? No. You know what Mike's going to do with that money? He's going to bring it back into his family, and he's going to try to better all his kids' existence and his wife and his life. That's what he's going to do with that money. He's not going to put it into some kind of political, I don't know. I don't know what they think. Like he's going to use that money for a positive thing. He's going to feed his kids with it. And so when you take that away from somebody, this is the part that I absolutely hate, is when you do that, it's no longer just a difference of opinion. It's no longer, even if you just say, I hate Mike Miller, or you hate whoever, you know what I mean? It's no longer even that. You're taking action on it. You're actually trying to hurt that person. And believe me, when you take money out of a breadwinner's pocket, you are hurting them, and they know it. And that is low. That is low for anybody to do. And I've been victim of it, and I'm sure most people have in the past. And it's the lowest of the low to hurt somebody like that.
I agree 100%, Art, and I'm really glad you've expressed that, and I'm glad I was here to kind of hear that being said from you, because I would like to say that there is a acute problem with this in society in general, and this is just one manifestation of it, but it really does affect people. It's called, there's a name for this. It's called narcissism. And
Yeah.
there are levels of narcissism that are, if I'm going to do everyone a favor right now, because I care about everybody who's listening to this. I care about everybody in comics. I care about creative people. I care about everybody. I'm just like, that's who I am as a person. I might not be able to translate that into real life action all the time. I try to, but really, I do believe that everyone has something inside them where they can figure things out. And I want to say right now, go on YouTube and look up narcissism, and just spend some time, if you have any free time, anybody, look at how this ruins people's lives, and question yourself and ask yourself, is that affecting my life in some kind of way? I'm not saying go out and accuse other people of being narcissists. I'm not saying make yourself a victim. I'm not saying any of that stuff. But what I am saying is learn about this phenomenon, because it's really important. It can really set your mind straight in terms of self-reflection and
And
how people are treating each other.
I think if you do watch things like that too, you kind of start to see like patterns in behavior of other people and different motives and stuff, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Art. I want to hear more about how you feel about this, because honestly, the way Mike has been treated is so poor that it just really rung a bell with me. And I'm curious on your take.
Okay, I just have a theory that it's kind of like road rage. I think when people, if you put that same person that's attacking Mike and those same people that banned Mike, and you put them in the same room together, and let's say before this happened, and so whatever led up to this, but they were dealing with it face to face, I don't think it would have got to this point, because I think when you see somebody, you realize they're a human being. You realize that that's a person. And I think on the internet, and like in a road rage scenario, you don't see those people as humans. You don't see them as yourself. You see them as some kind of, you can create all kinds of scenarios, because and you can treat them in all kinds of disrespectful ways, because they're not in front of you. You don't see them as human beings. You don't see them as yourself. And I believe that that's like, how you're saying narcissism and that. I think that that's what happens. It's a phenomenon. I think we've always had that. Like, if you can be detached from something, then you can judge it harshly, or you can hate it easier than if you understand it or you know it. And I think that the internet makes it so easy, or easier than ever before, to just dismiss something, or to hate it, or to like it instantly, and then move on in your life. Yeah, I mean, they have like buttons, they have like thumbs up, thumbs down, where you can actually judge things at a glance and just make a knee-jerk reaction, and judgment call, and boom, 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 it's done, and then just move on with your life. But what you have to realize is that these are people. These are people like yourself. So especially if you're going to take it to the extreme of trying to get somebody banned from a show, and at the very least, Mike just has a difference of opinion, or is a little bit more brash, or you misunderstood what he said, and then you got reactionary, and then decided that you were going to not just have a difference of opinion and then be okay with that, or just say to yourself, I don't like Mike Miller. You went and you wrote letters and emails, and you sent things to a place that could hurt Mike financially. And you did it, and you hurt Mike financially. And the reason I want to talk about this stuff as well is because this could happen to anybody. This could anytime. This is McCarthy. This is this is scary times, because if somebody wants to label you and they want to do this to you, they can. And now we live in such a scared society that the convention just decides, like, instead of getting into this, the easy solve is just to get rid of Mike. And, and why? Because Mike is on the right and he's not on the left. Is that why I don't even know how these decisions are made anymore. Like, I know that most people, it seems like that if you're on the right, then you can be condemned way easier than if you're on the left right now. And so it just seems like it's just such an easy target. Like, just being, it just saying, if you say I support the president, or that I'm, a Republican, then it's an automatic target on your back, and then you're fair game. And I know that politics have always been dirty. I'm not naive, but it seems like it's very finite now. It seems like it's not just okay to have a difference of opinion. You have to hurt that person. There has to be blood. And then even like, since we're on this, what's his name, Zach, your boy, where he publicly apologized for the crude comment that he made on his program, and he did that on national television. And
Mm.
yet that wasn't enough for people. Look it up if you. I'm not going to get into it, but it wasn't enough for people. People still felt like they had to hurt him in a deeper way, and I just don't know when's enough. Like, when he's dead. Like, when are you going to feel like you're totally uh, like you placated yourself, like that you're totally, like, I can be at peace now, Zach is dead, or like, well, what is your end game? I don't even know what the end game is. Like, is it when they're dead,
These are
when they're
I have
fired?
no idea. I have no idea what. Here's the thing. I take it back to that narcissism thing, because they're dependent on people to produce this energy that they're going to suck off of. It's kind of a grotesque way of putting it, but they're vampires for people's positive energy or creative energy or whatever, what have you. Even if it's a base level kind of attitude that they have, that they want to take that energy and turn it into something, because they can't produce it themselves, they don't have the right relationships, or they've ruined all their relationships in their life, or they don't have a spouse that's smart enough to put them on track. I mean, my wife and I talk about this all the time. You know, that we're there to keep each other kind of on track. Like the other person messes up or is going too far, the other person has to come in and say, "Hey, wait, what are you doing?"
Yeah.
And then there might be a disagreement, or maybe we're processing something that we didn't process when we were growing up, and like learning how to treat another person when things are going stressful. So this is the difference in the atmosphere right now, is that of this whole situation, is that you've got groups of people who want to face up to these issues, and they go out and talk about it, and they're saying, this is the reason why I believe this. Like Mike is a good example of that. Mike Miller says, okay, here's a good example of why I believe this, that, and the other. And then it becomes a conversation, and then they try to edit that conversation down into sound bites that make it appear as if he's not having a conversation, that he's simply having a dysfunctional relationship with the whole world, which he is not.
Right. Like
Obvious.
it's a bold statement. Like they just take one piece of
It's-
it, and then it becomes like the statement.
It's a bold statement to do that, considering Mike has worked with some top name creators, companies, licenses, all this other stuff, and produced a lot of work that's really notable. And I'm not saying everyone hangs their hat on the worldly success, but I think it's a good indicator of how far someone's willing to go to improve themselves or to put themselves out there and accept criticism. So I don't see the point in taking that criticism and turning on its head and trying to make that person look like they're, an impulsive, terrible person. So I think from a logical, intelligent standpoint, all this is pretty much garbage. And hey, some of these comic pros that have come against Comicsgate have definitely not really helped the situation, have they? Because they've come out and said the same stupid things that this, not this person. I won't even bring up her name, but those people who have brought this drama forth, they just kind of co-signed on all this stuff.
You
Whether
mean
they like,
the Grand Rapids people with Mike?
yeah, the Grand Rapids people, but also
The professionals that are
the
endorsing
professionals.
it.
And we don't need to name names because I think everyone knows who we're talking about. But big names in comics that have come out and said something, and they co-signed on all this kind of behavior without actually just being a cooler head and prevailing and say, hey, look, here's the situation. They could have entered into the fray, but they just didn't have what it takes to do that. So they just co-signed on behavior basically of adolescent people who never matured.
Or at the very least, just live and
nice
let live. Just live and let live. Don't say anything. Yeah, just keep it to yourself. You don't have to. Everything doesn't have to be politicized. Everything doesn't have to be, said out loud or acted upon.
I'm sure on that level, I think everyone can relate to that on some level in their life. Some people get away with it in life. They're just get, I don't want to shut anyone out of this conversation, but from my point of view, I've seen it go down in real life. There's some people who just can't let go of certain things. And those are the people you have to kind of watch out for sometimes. Sometimes when you channel that correctly and healthy, that can be such a blessing for everybody's life, if you're tenacious, but sometimes it can be so scary.
Yeah. Especially when you want blood. Go ahead, Taylor.
I think it's really strange just on the topic of people condemning things and stuff. It's kind of strange how virtue signaling has changed in the last 5 years because I used to always think like the SJW thing was more of a vocal minority before it starts spilling into everything. And it virtue signaling on social media kind of started out with people like being very braggy about good deeds. And then it went from like, oh, I'm a good person because I did all this stuff to, oh, I'm a good person because I hate all the right people. Like it just kind of went from them talking about it was kind of narcissistic and harmless to them being like, oh, I'm on your side because I don't like the right people.
Well said. I think that's well said.
Right.
Yeah.
It's an attempt to endorse evil in a nonchalant way. It's pathetic.
but
it's
also by trying to make themselves seem better. Like I hate all the
Yeah.
right people.
Yeah, and that's like I'll take it back to how we were talking about the music scene, how growing up in the music scene, how I can see these parallels between the art world and the music world, and kind of how this is all kind of culminated because there's so many creative people that are online. You know, because when you're young, when back in the day, you couldn't do this. You couldn't communicate like this unless you were a touring band or something like that, with this many people, and you didn't have all the connections. You were forced to make real world connections. So this kind of behavior would be called out pretty quickly. But now you have it on this level where everyone's doing it. People who have basically no stake in terms of creative output or making making a living or anything, and they're coming out and wholesaling, signing off on this kind of behavior, and you're like, what are you doing? Like, you're trying to regulate how people view the art world. It's just nonsense to me. I just don't even understand it. People just have a really low filter for compassion, I guess.
Well, the
Um,
reason I don't understand is I don't know what their end game is. I don't know what they're taking from it, other than that they feel good because they hated all the right people, or that like the way I feel about the whole SJWs is social justice warrior. I think just the title is arrogant because most of the time they fight a fight on somebody else's part, but not always does that person that they're fighting for want that. Some people just want things to go away. Like, if I was a victim of whatever, like let's just say rape or whatever, that, you know, um, or molestation, and I said something, or it seemed like this thing went bad, like it made the news or something like that, then there's a group of people that feel like whatever it wasn't good enough for that person. So then that they feel like they have to fight on behalf of that person. And the only way that works is if that person themselves said to a group of people, "Hey, I need your help," or "I would like to find some kind of solution," or whatever it is. But a lot of times they're fighting an imaginary battle on the behalf of somebody that they may or they may not even want people to speak for them. They may just want it to go away. You know what I mean? Like they
Right.
may not want it to be a big deal. Like I'm a very private person. Uh, and if something like that happened in my life, I think I would just want it to go away so I could move forward. I wouldn't necessarily want a bunch of people, talking about it endlessly. And making a big deal, or actually trying to hurt somebody on my behalf. It would be horrible. It would just be horrible to think that somebody would do something on my behalf to hurt somebody else. I couldn't live with it. It would be horrible. So, yeah. So, I think we should try to lighten it up a little bit.
Yeah.
well, Jason Lee says, I've been following this movement for over half a year, and it's amazing how much creativity and positive energy is generated through these creators. It got me back into comics. You have a fan for life.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I think we tend to get a little serious at times. I always wanted to stay fun, or as fun as we can possibly make it, and I hope I didn't burden anybody. And thank you so much, John, for your honesty with all this. I really, really appreciate it. That's one of the things I like about this YouTube is hopefully we can talk honestly, but not in a hateful way, and maybe mend some fences, maybe bring people together. It's comics, for goodness sake. I mean, this is supposed to be fun and it's all childlike entertainment. So why are we getting so serious about it? And so Taylor, do you have our? We should do a little update on Black and White here.
Oh, let me check out. Also, we have Nasser and Peter Palmiotti are in the chat right now.
Hey, Nasser. Oh, Nasser sent me a script. I haven't got a chance to open it and read it yet. But as per usual, my response would be, when I have time, Nasser, I'll read it. I appreciate you sending it to me, but when I get some time, I'll read it.
All right, I got the black and white numbers.
Okay, where are we at?
We have 276 backers,
Cool.
and we are at 15,321.
Yes, and I think this is this. I think at noon, a little after noon, it'll be completing our first week of the
Yes, that's
campaign.
right.
Yeah, so I'm really excited. Thank you so much for getting out and supporting this book. I can't wait to get it done and get it into your hands. This is a 25-year dream in the making. So thanks. And I think our next stretch goal is to upgrade the book. So
That's right.
yeah, we're going to get cool paper and we're going to square bound the book because right now it's stapled. So we're gonna make it a cool square bound. I just got a note from my daughter. Want me to pick up food? Ooh. Yes, I do want you to pick up food. Hey, Amanda, say hi to everybody.
Hi guys.
My daughter's
I
she's an aspiring artist, so we're probably going to do an interview with her soon, so she can talk about the college system right now. I'm sure John has
Ooh.
stories
oh,
about
I know all
the
about that. Yeah.
yeah the climate change.
Can I say something about my school?
Okay,
My teacher sent me an article to read about a woman who knits using yarn out of her vagina.
Oh, I saw that.
That's
Oh
oh gosh,
that's disgusting.
yeah.
I'm not holding back. I'm holding back. That's the whole body fluids and art thing. Like I thought that was played out about 25 years ago, but I guess it's some people still think it's the thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I always think
Scary.
like Jackson Pollock. This is I think that guy's a fraud. I don't mind saying it. Um, people that think Jackson Pollock is a great painter, and I hope I'm not stepping on your toes, John. But he throws paint at a canvas,
No.
and then he writes a
No.
pretentious paragraph
I
about what it is.
I personally come from the school is of if you can discover a technique from someone that did something, that's fine. Use the technique and utilize it. But I never advocated. I personally myself never advocated for purely just making junk. Like I can't handle it. I can't handle it. And my wife is in the same position. She actually had her master's in art education, but she was a fine artist too. And we actually have had careers in the fine art world. Um, and I'll tell you a thing or two. It's not what it's cracked up to be.
You know what
So
we should do?
really,
You know what we should do? Okay, we should save this, but maybe if you don't mind, we can get you on with my daughter because
Ooh, that'd be awesome.
she's going through all this right now, and so maybe you guys can chat about the college and the the fine arts and how I guess sometimes it's more about pretense and being pretentious than it is about the actual craft or actually, doing the job itself. I'm a craftsman. I like the aspects of like learning how to do these things, draw, you know, um, paint, do all these different things. Um, but throwing paint when you can get somebody that's standing right next to you to probably duplicate your Pollock painting, I don't think that has anything to do with any kind of talent or point of view uh, or depth of feeling or emotion. You know what I mean? It's
mhm.
just throwing paint or those people that do like this is a straight red line on a white canvas. I just don't. I think at that point you're just kind of like you're a house painter. You can paint a very straight line. I can't put that stuff on a level of an accomplished artist. And I think that um, just in a nutshell, my daughter it probably isn't getting the best education that she could because of a lot of these things that don't seem to have anything to do with the craft of painting or drawing. They have a lot to do with the pretense of, I guess, selling something, or like she said about the yarn and the
Some
private
private.
part. Like what is
That
that?
I know. I mean, from my point of view, I don't know how what probably on a time schedule here, but in terms of the overall effect of art school, I would say the whole approach is kind of backwards because really people need to learn their technical skills and what they're good at and emphasize those and then have a framework for completing um, projects and then
Yes.
moving on so they can create a studio type environment for themselves. I mean, what tell me anyone anyone tell me what kind of artist doesn't have a studio environment that is successful? I would argue practically none. So I think one of the major failures of art school is to not promote that identity, is to say, hey, look, you should have a functioning studio where you have things happening. But in art school, they try and just teach you all these philosophical slash, concepts that ultimately they're not wholly classical in their nature. And secondarily, they're not refining your technical skills, which you need more in the real world, because I've seen it. I've worked with in a corporate setting with a lot of artists serving the arts, and I'll go as far as say, um, get if that company wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the ability of the artists, the people who had a good arts background, being able to accomplish technical skills. I used to build crates for Van Goghs. Did you know that?
No.
That's part of my job history too. Is that
That's pretty cool.
yeah, I built like things. I built shipment crates for Chuck Close paintings and all sorts of crazy stuff. Like I I I was in that world, and I realized real quickly. I was like, hey, this is awesome. Like I don't know anyone who would be doing this. Hardly anyone. I mean, there's a very small fraction of people who can actually handle the art world. So I honestly think that it's been typecast and misrepresented for too long. And they've been kicking people, creative, technical, skilled people out of these worlds for a long time. That's why I love comics and music so much, is because you're allowed to spread your creative wings and you can operate more independently, and you don't need a framework necessarily.
And the thing is, when you see a comic book artist, when you see a good artist draw, you see those pages, you realize the level of education that went into that, because it's on every page, every panel. Because the thing is, what people might not know, I think comics are probably the most challenging art form that exists, period. Because when you get that script from the writer, you don't know what he's going to throw at you. You know what I mean? He could just make up, hey, this is a fleet of whatever alien, whatever, and then just say they have green skin, and they're bug-like. And then the next thing you know, you have to create a whole alien race, a world, all their ships, their tech, and you have to do it all within 30 days. And that might just be for 2 pages. It might even be just for a panel. And then you have to draw, a freeway congestion scene where, a bridge gets blown up. You know what I mean? All within the same issue. And then a romantic scene, for 2 pages. So comics are very diversified in subject matter, and they can go from panel to panel. And if that artist isn't well trained and isn't able to kind of educate themselves almost instantly. Like, oh, I've never drawn a Model T Ford, ever in my life. But now the script says I have to draw that. So then you have to do the research on the fly. You have to then kind of educate yourself how basically the mechanics of this car work. And then you have to execute it in multiple panels. And you still have to do it in a relatively short period of time. So I always used to say, like, making a comic is like making a major motion picture in 30 days. And just to be fair to all the comic artists out there, most of the time you have less than 30 days to draw a comic book. So it's an amazing art form. I wish more people read them. I wish more people could see the level of dedication that people like myself are putting into these books every month. It's no short of a miracle that these things happen every month, and that they get out there and they're as good as they are. So next time you overly judge a comic book, just realize how much time and energy goes into these books, because the education level on most of those artists is beyond anything I think I've ever seen, because I too have a little bit of fine art, and I have an illustration background as well. And also I have friends that are storyboard artists and concept artists in film, and a lot of them have comic book background, and that's why they can deliver those things so quickly. But also, they all will say that what they're doing now is easier than when they were doing comic books,
Hmm.
because comic books is so daunting, and it's a relentless schedule. It's every month. You have to at least match what you did the month before, but always, you know how we all are, John, as creative people, we want to top what we did the month before or the time before. So you're always trying to plus it as well and get better and draw better and to bring a better product to the readers. And yeah, I mean, it's really amazing. Sometimes when I talk like this, I just wonder, why the heck do I do this? You know, like it seems so daunting.
I completely agree. I mean, look, I'm looking at let's see, classic X-Men. So that was the 80s re-release of um the all new, all different X-Men. So it would have been X-Men 103 from Marvel in the I guess that was the 70s sometime. And um the art, it's Dave Cockrum, I
Ooh,
believe.
gosh, you talk about inventing and reinventing and coming up with stuff on the fly.
I mean, this guy has like, he's not, he's kind of got the whole package here because it looks like an animated series broken down, really well illustrated and broken down into a comic. It just looks like that much action and detail, and the figure work is really good, and there's just, the panels are just intense. There's a lot of cinematic stuff happening. I'm
And
just,
just, oh, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
And all the design work, all I, like there's Colossus, Storm. God, how many new X-Men were there?
Well, there was
Like,
Juggernaut is definitely played up in these issues. So
yeah, so he actually designed those characters as well. So there's the whole new X-Men. There's a handful of characters that he created the visuals for. Um,
Nightcrawler, yeah.
yeah, that still are the template for the character designs today.
And I would
So
argue they influenced a lot of stuff after this, a lot.
that's exactly where I'm going. Yeah.
This exact team
Yep.
that he did. Because when you look at it overall, you look at it, and I remember thinking, I visualized that team a lot as well, as I was growing up. That had a big effect on me because I think I saw this stuff when I was younger, and then when I started getting the newer comic books, you know, in the Jim Lee, when I started hitting the era where you were involved, that's when I was like, oh, I can see why these are such interesting designs. Like I could see why I always think of those characters, but it really, his design work, Cochrum's design work, and probably his productivity had something to do with it as well, because it
A
just,
lot. Yeah, a lot to do with it. And one of the best things, like even like we were talking about music and comics, is we're all building off of the template that came before. So like the Beatles were listening to, you know, 50s music and they were influenced, and you can hear it in their early music. And so every generation is building off the generation before. And that's part of the collective that we were talking about earlier as well. So you have um, Dave Cockrum's legacy, you have Stan Lee, you have Jack Kirby, you have Bob Kane's legacy, you have, you know, Siegel and Schuster's legacy, and that we're still all building off of that. And then I just think it's such an amazing thing. I was thinking about this earlier, and now I can bring it back around. Did you ever see that movie School of Rock, John?
yeah,
I think it came
The
before.
Jack Black movie?
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And I think it came before. There's a documentary out. There's like this metal guy, and he went and he did a family tree of where metal came from, like its early roots to like contemporary time. And it's three documentaries, I think. And he breaks it down into three different groups of metal, like punk metal, you know, all the different, you know, the different stuff. And so I think that probably gave the idea to the School of Rock, because you know where Jack Black does the thing like, this is how rock happened, and then he does that little tree on the chalkboard
right.
and all the different branches that branch out to
Hmm.
the different like prog rock, punk rock, you know, heavy metal, all those things. I I would love somebody to do that for comic books. I think it would be so
Ooh.
it would be so awesome if there was like this crazy documentarian that could go in there and just love the heck out of comics and could take like early ideas and then just kind of start creating a tree, and then all the branches and things that come from that tree and the different areas that comics has branched out to. I think it would be so much fun because I think I'm just so silly with my thinking. Is, like Batman had the whiteout eyes, and I loved that as a kid. Like you can't see his eyeballs, like it's just this white slit. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, was Batman the first character to do that? And then I started thinking, I think the Phantom, the Ghost Who Walks, may predate Batman. So where did that idea come from? Did it come from that character design, or did it come from one prior? So for me, I always I think like, where did this mainstay of comics come from? That
Yeah,
we're
it's a
all
part of like comic aesthetic language now.
Exactly. Like, where did these things come from? Like, obviously, you go, oh, Kirby Crackle. Like, because people call it Kirby Crackle, so it's branded. Like if you do those energy dots, everybody just says Kirby Crackle. So he gets credit for that, so everybody knows where that came from. But these other things, like where did some of this aesthetic language come from? Where did these ideas come from? Like one of the easy ones is like, why the tights? Well, in circuses there were strong men, and those strong men wore tights and those little trunks and the belt. So if you look at Superman and you look at Batman, you look at early superheroes, they all, even the Phantom, they all were emulating the circus strongman. And so I just find that stuff fascinating, and how radio, with the Shadow and the Green Hornet and the Lone Ranger, and how all those ideas became, like pulp ideas and became comic book ideas, and how even comic books came from comic strips. I just find all that stuff fascinating. And I'd love to see a documentary that's done like that.
Absolutely, it would be very interesting.
School of Rock.
It'd be quite an undertaking to do just because of how
Yeah.
long the history is and kind of just how many deviations there are.
Because it probably dates back further than, yeah, it does date back further than rock and roll. So rock and roll is late 50s, 60s. So this would date back to what, the 30s? Yeah.
You know,
And
30s or 40s.
yeah,
So
and
yeah,
in a visual medium, so that adds a whole layer of complexity because you have to examine things a little bit more. You can get into a little bit of a finer, refined approach, whereas music, it's a little bit more, straightforward, I think.
yeah, because a song can say everything in just that one song, in that 1, 2, 3 minute song. But yeah, this would be a lot of nuanced stuff, which
Right, 'cause
I find it would be amazing.
you're dealing with 20, 30 page books, short stories. You're seeing like layers of people. Plus, people often have longer careers in the visual arts. So, in comics, you're going to have someone with a career of like 20 to 30, maybe 40, 50 years
That's
easily,
true.
almost easily, compared to a musician where you might only have really 10 prime years and then the rest is just kind of hit and miss.
Yeah.
And that's in the best case scenario for a lot of things. So
Well, let's not make this too daunting for a future documentarian that might want to do this.
well, you can always start out. Not to beat on this too much, but you could always start out with the biggest names and kind of go from there, and then it just then that's when it gets interesting, because then you're like, oh, the Neil Adams school is coming from this direction and kind of goes out in that direction.
Yeah, you could do like, because in a nutshell, there's kind of like decades that were kind of defined by certain artists. So like the 60s were probably the Jack Kirby decade, and then the 70s were the Neil Adams realism decade, and then the 80s were probably more like, the Jim Lee West Coast, look that defined kind of the decade. And then I think the 90s were probably getting into more of an animation phase, like the Joe Mad and
Definitely.
kind of phase. So yeah, you can make it that broad, but for me personally, I'd love to see the nuanced stuff.
Me too. there's
Yeah.
always stuff where I'm picking up on. Like I didn't know Arthur Adams very well until I started re-examining the X-Men, because I was looking to expose my child to the the origins of the X-Men, as we, in terms of the bulk of the stuff. I wanted him to read the Claremont stories. And so then I was like, okay, well, who are the artists? And I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea it was this intense with these artists. And I can see exactly where that style translated into modern styles. And
Yeah, I think it'd be a lot of fun. I do that all the time. Um, where I try to, like, where did this come from? Why am I using this line? Why am I using this way to define this panel and stuff like that? So then I always think, oh my gosh, that's probably from when I was like 6 and I was looking at this comic book or whatever it is, So those influences are always, you know what I mean? Like, but you have to, like, I probably, when you're making music, right? And you're like, why did I come up with that riff? And you always have to kind of think, like, was it me? Did I create that totally out of my head? Or was I kind of like filtering something else? Or was it a derivative of this other idea? And I find that fascinating, when I'm drawing, and probably, if you're like me, when you're writing songs and stuff, you kind of go, where did that idea come from? Where is
yeah,
that me, or did I
it can,
listen to? Oh, go ahead.
no, it can definitely get like that. And then, but when you get productive, and that's when you when you get to the point where you're just making it happen, then you're like, okay, I can see this is coming from here and here and here. And then you stop analyzing it as much. I think it's harder when you're younger, because you're definitely trying not to step on your own toes, so to speak. You don't want to make it look like you're slavishly imitating things, or maybe you're trying for an imitation. Like some people, that's how they get their start. They make that imitative. Like Ethan is a good example of this. Ethan Van Sciver, doing the early Cyberfrog, he was definitely going for that McFarlane style. He had that, and that's like a really recognizable style. So you can definitely say, okay, well, he was trying to do that. But then he developed his own sensibilities of what he really could do and what he wanted to do, and then he veered away from that. And
Yeah.
he can see he retained some of the qualities of that, but maybe it'll look like that sometimes, and then other times it doesn't.
Yeah, we are a product of our influences. That's why it's good to have many influences, because then you can bring all those, and it's that combination of all those influences that can, and then whatever that you bring to the equation, that then makes it original or unique
Yeah,
or your
creates your
own.
own style.
Can I
Yeah.
ask you a question, Art? I don't want
Sure.
to keep us going too long. I'm um if we keep going for 10 minutes, is that okay? Do you have 10 more minutes, do you think?
I'm gonna
Or
take.
5?
I got my lunch here, so yeah. If,
Oh,
if we
okay.
can wrap it up,
Let's
yeah,
wrap it
that'd be
up.
great.
Well, I'll take the reins for a second, since you guys have done so much for me to promote me. I would like to ask Art you a couple questions. With Black and White, when you initially put that out, how many pencils had you done, um, like published before you published Black and White?
Um,
Before
the,
Image
the,
published it.
yeah, the thing is, I started as an inker and a penciler on the same day. So I got jobs at Marvel and DC the same day. So I started as an inker at Marvel and then a penciler at DC.
Okay, so I'm
So
going to have to go back and do my research, and I recommend that maybe everyone in the audience go back and see if they can find some of your early work, because I would be interested in seeing how you've changed. But I've noticed that in the remastered, your pencils have definitely gone to a high level of refinement from where you were in the 90s. Uh, and that's not to speak poorly on that, because your 90s stuff looked real strong too. But this, I mean, I'm really impressed with how you've adapted your current, where you are currently in the remastering process.
yeah, I think that as an artist, you have to be okay with, you put it out there and then you just kind of move forward. So it's kind of a moment in time. That's the way I look at my work. So I try not to look back and go, oh, I hated it. I look back and go, I probably wouldn't make those decisions today. And so then the work gets to speak for itself. So it's definitely a product of the 90s. And so one of the main points with the remastered was to try to bring it into a place. Well, one, to back up, we only had 3 issues. So I always felt like it was a compromise from the very beginning, a good compromise, but a compromise nonetheless. And so with Taylor and I remastering this thing, along with Pamela's help editorially, we're taking it into a 21st century feel, look, and everything. So I think this one, it'll be able to be the story that I wanted to tell more, but it will also be a more contemporary story, and that the artwork will reflect that as well. It'll be more contemporary, and it'll be more of what I guess my style is now. So it'll be more of what, you know, the 25 years, a culmination of getting better and learning more has brought, and I'll be able to bring that to the new remastered series. So yeah, that's a great question. You know what, John? I would love to keep talking to you, and if you don't mind, I would really like to bring you back, because this was fascinating. I hope everybody enjoyed it as well, because I had a great time.
Yeah, this is a
Thanks.
good one.
Thanks, and I really appreciate that, and I'll take you up on that offer, and I'm sure there's lots of different avenues we can discuss, but I really want to help promote you guys, and you know, I think people need to see this comic, because I think it's a really good, let's say it'd be a really important signal to other creators that you've worked with in the 90s, and whenever there's groups of people that need to see that you're doing this, and I think that's vital to what's happening right now.
Well, thank you so much, John, and we'll put your you want your YouTube in the link?
Yep. I believe my YouTube is going to be monkeys. Monkeys.
I can copy it from your profile.
Yeah, if you copy it from my profile and just put it in there, that would be great. Because
So check the link in the description for a Christ Energetics channel with dedicated music and stuff. And thank you again for doing the music for the black and white video. That video will be made public next on our channel. If you guys want to see that, you can also see it in the Indiegogo page. So check the description for the link to the black and white Indiegogo, where you can support us there, and you can see the video there as well.
Thanks, Taylor. And
Yeah,
support black and white people. Support black and white. Go to Indiegogo and support this comic. Make it happen.
you are
now.
so awesome, John. Thank you so very much. You are so amazing. This was so much fun. So thanks, guys. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.